Pistol politics, Robert Irvin Howard. Politics and book learning is bad enough took separate. Together they're a blight and a curse. Take Yellow Dog for instance, a mining camp over in the Apache River country, where I was rash enough to take up my abode announced. Yellow Dog was a decent camp till politics reared its head in our midst and education come slithering after. The whiskey was good and middling cheap. The poker and fair games was honest if you watched the dealers clost. 3 or 4 piddling fights a night was the usual run, and a man hadn't been shot dead in more than a week by my reckoning. Then, like my aunt Tascosa Polk would say, come the deluge. It all begun when 40 Rod Harrigan moved his gambling outfit over to Alderville and left our one-frame building vacant, and Goosenegg Wilkerson got the idea of turning it into a city hall. Then he said we ought to have a mayor to go with it, and announced himself as candidate. Naturally Bull Hawkins, our other leading citizen, come out egging him. The election was set for April 11th. Gooseneck established his campaign headquarters in the Silver Saddle Saloon, and Bull taken up his'n in the Red Tomahawk on t'other side of the street. First thing we knowed, Yellow Dog was in the grip of politics. The campaign got underway, and the casualties was mounting daily as public interest become more and more fatally aroused, and on the afternoon of the 9th Gooseneck come into his headquarters and says, we got to make a sweepin' offensive, boys. Bull Hawkins is out generaling us. That shootin' match he put on for a prime beef steer yesterday made a big hit with the common herd. He's trying to convince Yellow Dog that if elected he'd provide the camp with more high-class amusement than I could. Breck Elkins, will you pause in your guzzling and listen here a minute? As chief of this here political organization I demand your attention. I hear you, I says. I was to the match, and they barred me on a technicality, otherwise I would have won the whole steer. It warn't so exciting, far as I could see. Only one man he got shot, and he was one of my voters, scowled Gooseneck. But we got to outshine Bull's efforts to seduce the mob. He's resorting to low, underhanded tactics by buying votes outright. I scorn such measures anyway. I've bought all I'm able to pay for. We got to put on a show which outdazzles his turn shooting match. A rodeo, maybe, suggested Mule McGraw. Or a good dogfight. No, says Gooseneck. My show will be a symbol of progress and culture. We stages a spellin' match tomorrow night in the City Hall. Next morning when the polls opens the voters'll still be so dazzled by the grandeur of our entertainment they'll elect me by a vast majority. How many men in this here camp can spell good enough to get into a spellin' bee? Says I. I'm confident there's at least 35 men in this camp which can read and write, says Gooseneck. That's plenty. But we got to find somebody to give out the words. It wouldn't look right for me, it'd be beneath my official dignity. Who was educated enough for the job? I am, says Jerry Brennan and Bill Garrison simultaneous. They then showed their teeth at each other. They warn't friends no how. I ain't but one get the job, asserted Gooseneck. I tests your ability. Can either one of you spell Constantinople? K-O-N begun Garrison, and Brennan burst into a loud and mocking guffaw, and said something pointed about ignoramuses. You $% hash and, says Garrison bloodthirstily. Gentlemen, squawked Gooseneck and then ducked as they both went for their guns. They cleared leather about the same time. When the smoke oozed away, Gooseneck crawled out from under the roulette table and cussed fervently. 2 more reliable voters gone to glory. He raged. Breckenridge, why'n't you stop 'em? 'Twarn't none of my business, says I, reaching for another drink, because a stray bullet had knocked my glass out of my hand. Hey! I addressed the barkeep sternly. I see you fixin' to chalk up to the spilt drink and me. Charge it to Jerry Brennan. He spilt it. Dead men pays no bills, complained the bartender. Cease them petty squabbles, snarled Gooseneck. You argue over a glass of liquor when I've just lost 2 good votes. Drag 'em out, boys. He ordered the other members of the organization which was emerging from behind the bar and the whiskey barrels where they'd took refuge when the shooting started. Damn, says Gooseneck with bitterness. This here is a deadly lick to my campaign. I not only loses 2 more votes, but them was the best educated men in camp, outside of me. Now who we going to get to conduct the spellin' match? Anybody which can read can do it, says Lobo Harrison, a hoss thief with a mean face and ingrown disposition. He'd go a mile out of his way just to kick a dog. Even Elkins that could do it, yeah, if there was anything to read from, snorted Gooseneck. But they ain't a line of writing in camp except on whiskey bottles. We got to have a man with a lot of long words in his head. Breckenridge, damn it, Just because I told the barkeep to charge your drinks onto campaign expenses ain't no reason for you to freeze onto that bar permanent. Ride over to Alderville and get us a educated man. How'll he know whether he's educated or not? Sneered Lobo, which seemed to dislike me passionately for some reason or another. Make him spell Constantinople, says Gooseneck. He ain't go over there, says Soapy Jackson. The folks has threatened to lynch him for crippling their sheriff. I didn't cripple their fool sheriff, I says indignantly. He crippled hisself falling through a wagon wheel when I give him a kind of a push with a rock. How you spell that the Constance Hopple word? Well, he spelt it 30 or 40 times till I had it memorized, so I rode over to Alderville. When I rode into town the folks looked at me coldly and bunched up and whispered amongst theirselves, but I paid no attention to 'em. I never seen the deputy sheriff, unless that was him I seen climbing a white oak tree as I hove in sight. I went into the White Eagle Saloon and drunk me a dram, and says to the barkeep, "Who's the best educated man in Alderville?" Says he, "Snake River Murgatroyd, which deals Monty over to the Elite Amusement Palace." So I went over there, and just as I went through the door I happened to remember that Snake River had swore he was going to shoot me on sight next time he seen me, account of some trouble we'd had over a card game. But such things is too trivial to bother about. I went up to where he was setting dealing Monty, and I says, "Hey, place your bet," says he. Then he looked up and said, "You $#/0 and at," and reached for his gun, but I got mine out first and shoved the muzzle under his nose. "Spell Constantinople," I tells him. He turned pale and said, "Are you crazy? Spell it." I roared, and he says, "Constantinople." "What the hell?" "Good," I said, throwing his gun over in the corner out of temptation's way. "We want you to come over to Yellow Dog and give out words at a spelling match." Everybody in the place was holding their breath. Snake River moved his hands nervous-like and knocked a jack of diamonds off onto the floor. He stooped like he was going to pick it up, but instead he jerked a bowie out of his boot and tried to stab me in the belly. Well, much as I would have enjoyed shooting him, I knowed it would spoil the spelling match, so merely taken the knife away from him, and held him upside down to shake out whatever other weapons he might have hid, and he begun to holler, "Help! Murder! Elkins is killing me! It's a Yellow Dog plot!" Somebody howled, and the next instant the air was full of beer mugs and cuspidors. Some of them spittoons was quite heavy, and when one missed me and went bong on Snake River's head, he curled up like a angleworm which has been tromped on. "Look it there!" They hollered, like it was my fault. "He's trying to kill Snake River. Get him, boys." They then fell on me with billiard sticks and chair legs in a way which has made me suspicious of Alderville's hospitality ever since. Argument being useless, I tucked Snake River under my left arm and started knocking them fool critters right and left with my right fist, and I reckon that was how the bar got wrecked. I never seen a bar a man's head would go through easier than. So pretty soon the survivors abandoned the fray and run out of the door hollering, "Help! Murder! Rise up, citizens! Yellow Dog is at our throats! Rise and defend your homes and loved ones." You would have thought the Apaches was burning the town. The way folks was hollering and running for their guns and shooting at me, as I clomb aboard Cap'n Kidd and headed for Yellow Dog. I left the main road and headed through the brush for a old trail I knowed about, because I seen a whole army of men getting on their hosses to look out after me, and while I knowed they couldn't catch Cap'n Kidd, I was afeard they might hit Snake River with a stray bullet if they got within range. The brush was pretty thick and I reckon it was the branches slapping him in the face which brung him to, because all to onst he begun hollering blue murder, "You ain't tarkying me to Yellow Dog," he yelled. "You're tarkying me out in the hills to murder me. Help! Help, or, shut up," I snorted. "This here's a shortcut, you can't get across Apache River unless you follow the road to the bridge," says he. "I can, too," I says. "We'll go across on the footbridge." With that he gave a scream of horror and a convulsive wrench which tore himself clean out of his shirt which I was holding on to. The next thing I knowed all I had in my hand was an empty shirt and he was on the ground and scuttling through the bushes. I taken in after him, but he was pretty tricky dodging around stumps and trees, and I begun to believe I was going to have to shoot him in the hind leg to catch him, when he made the mistake to trying to climb a tree. I rode up onto him before he could get out of reach, and reached up and got him by the leg and pulled him down, and his language was painful to hear. It was his own fault he slipped out of my hand, he kicked so violent. I didn't go to drop him on his head, but just as I was reaching down for him, I heard horses running, and looked up and here come that darned Alderville posse busting through the brush right on me. I'd lost so much time chasing Snake River they'd catched up with me. So I scooped him up and hung him over my saddle horn, because he was out cold, and headed for Apache River. Cap'n Kidd drawed away from them hosses like they was hobbled, so they warn't scarcely in pistol range of us when we busted out on the east bank. The river was up, just foaming and dabbling, and the footbridge warn't nothing, only just a log. But Cap'n Kidd's sure-footed as a billy goat. We started across it, and everything went all right till we got about the middle of it, and then Snake River come to and seen the water booming along under us. He lost his head and begun to struggle and kick and holler, and his spurs scratched Cap'n Kidd's hide. That made Cap'n Kidd mad, and he turned his head and tried to bite my leg, because he always blames me for everything that happens, and lost his balance and fell off. That would have been all right, too, because as we hit the water I got hold of Cap'n Kidd's tail with one hand, and Snake River's undershirt with the other, and Cap'n Kidd hit out for the west bank. They is very few streams he can't swim, flood or not. But just as we was nearly across, the posse appeared on the hind bank and started shooting at me, and they was apparently in some doubt as to which head in the water was me, because some of 'em shot at Snake River, too, just to make sure. He opened his mouth to holler at 'em, and got it full of water and darn near strangled. Then all to once somebody in the brush on the west shore opened up with a Winchester, and one of the posse hollered, "Look out, boys. It's a trap. Elkins has led us into ambush." They turned around and hightailed it for Alderville. Well, what with the shooting and a gullet full of water, Snake River was having a regular fit, and he kicked and thrashed so he kicked himself clean out of his undershirt, and just as my feet hit bottom, he slipped out of my grip and went whirling off downstream. I jumped out on land, ignoring the hearty kick Cap'n Kidd planted in my midriff, and grabbed my lariat off my saddle. Gooseneck Wilkerson come prancing out of the brush, waving a Winchester and yelling, "Don't let him drown, dang you. My whole campaign depends on that spellin' bee. Do something." I ran along the bank and made a throw and looped Snake River around the ears. It warn't a very good catch, but the best I could do under the circumstances, and skin will always grow back onto a man's ears. I hauled him out of the river, and it was plumb ungrateful for him to accuse me later of dragging him over them sharp rocks on purpose. I like to know how he figured I could rope him out to Apache River without skinning him up a little. He'd swallowed so much water he was nigh at his last gasp. Gooseneck rolled him onto his belly and jumped up and down on his back with both feet to get the water out. Gooseneck said that was artificial respiration, but from the way Snake River hollered I don't believe it done him much good. Anyway, he choked up several gallons of water. When he was able to threaten our lives betwixt cuss words, Gooseneck says, "Get him on your hoss and let's get started." Mine run off when the shooting started. I just suspected you'd be pursued by them dumbwits and would take the shortcut. That's why I come to meet you. Come on. We got to get Snake River some medical attention. In his present state he ain't in no shape to conduct no spellin' match. Snake River was too groggy to set in the saddle, so we hung him across it like a cowhide over a fence, and started out, me leading Cap'n Kidd. It makes Cap'n Kidd very mad to have anybody but me on his back, so he hadn't went more'n a mile when he reached around and sot his teeth in the seat of Snake River's pants. Snake River had been groaning very weak and dismal and commanding us to stop and let him down so's he could utter his last words, but when Cap'n Kidd bit him he let out a remarkable strong yell and bust into language unfit for a dying man, $% / and, quoth he passionately, "Why have I got to be butchered for a yellow dog holiday?" We was reasoning with him, when old man Jake Hansen hove out of the bushes. Old Jake had a cabin 100 yards back from the trail. He was about the width of a barn door, and his whiskers was marvelous to behold. "What's this ungodly noise about?" he demanded. "Who's getting murdered?" "I am," says Snake River fiercely. "I'm been sacrificed to the passions of the brutal mob." "You shut up," said Gooseneck severely. "Jake, this is the gent we've consented to let conduct the spellin' match." Well, says Jake, interested. "Educated man, hey? Why, he don't look no different from us folks, if the blood were wiped off of him. Say, listen, boys, bring him over to my cabin. I'll dress his wounds and feed him and take care of him and get him to the city hall tomorrow night in time for the spellin' match. In the meantime he can teach my daughter Salome her letters." "I refuse to tutor a dirty-faced cub," began Snake River when he seen a face speaking eagerly at us from the trees. "Who's that?" he demanded. "My daughter Salome," said old Jake. 19 her last birthday and ain't neither read nor write. None of my folks ever could, far back as family history goes. But I wants her to get some education. It's a human obligation," says Snake River. "I'll do it." So we left him at Jake's cabin, propped up on a bunk, with Salome feeding him spoon victuals and whiskey, and me and Gooseneck headed for Yellow Dog. which warn't hardly a mile from there. Gooseneck says to me, "We won't say nothing about Snake River bin at Jake's shack. Bull Hawkins is sweet on salami and he's so darn jealous-minded it makes him mad for another man to even stop there to say hello to the folks. We don't want nothing to interfere with our show. You act like you got a lot of confidence in it," I says. "I banks on it heavy," says he. "It's a symbol of civilization." Well, just as we come into town we met Mule McGraw with fire in his eye and corn juice on his breath. "Gooseneck, listen," says he. "I just got wind of a plot of Hawkins and Jack Clanton to get a lot of our voters so drunk election day that they won't be able to get to the polls. Let's call off the spellin' match and go over to the Red Tomahawk and clean out that rat nest." "No," says Gooseneck, "we promised the mob a show, and we keeps our word." "Don't worry, I'll think of a way to circumvent the heathen." Mule headed back for the Silver Saddle, shaking his head, and Gooseneck sat down on the edge of a horse trough and thunk deeply. I'd begun to think he'd dropped off to sleep, when he riz up and said, "Breck, get hold of Soapy Jackson and tell him to sneak out of camp and stay hid till the morning of the 11th. Then he's to ride in just before the polls open and spread the news that there has been a big gold strike over in Wild Ross Gulch. A lot of fellas will stampede for there without waiting to vote. Meanwhile you will have circulated amongst the men you know are going to vote for me, and let 'em know we are going to work this campaign strategy. With all my men in camp, and most of Bull's heading for Wild Ross Gulch, right and justice triumphs and I wins." So I went and found Soapy and told him what Gooseneck said, and on the strength of it he immediately headed for the Silver Saddle, and begun guzzling on campaign credit. I felt it was my duty to go along with him and see that he didn't get so full he forgot what he was supposed to do, and we was putting down the 6th drama piece when in come Jack McDonald, Jim Leary, and Tarantula Allison, all Hawkins' men. Soapy focused his wandering eyes on them, and says, "Who's this here cluttering up the scenery? Why'n't you mavericks stay over to the Red Tomahawk where you belong? It's a free country," asserted Jack McDonald. "What about this here darn spellin' match Gooseneck's bragging about all over town?" "Well, what about it?" I demanded, hitching my harness forward. "The political foe don't live which can beard Elkins in his lair. We demands to know who conducts it," stated Leary. "At least half the men in camp eligible to compete is in our crowd. We demands fair play. We're bringing in a cultured gent from another town," I says coldly. "Who?" demanded Allison. "None of your dang business," trumpeted Soapy, which gets delusions of valor when he's full of liquor. As a champion of progress and civic pride I challenges the skunk-odoured forces of corrupt politics, and, bam! McDonald swung with a billiard ball and Soapy kissed the sawdust. "Now look what you done," I says peevishly. "If you coyotes ain't look like gents, you'll oblige me by getting to hell outta here. If you don't like our company suppose you tries to put us out." They challenged, so when I'd finished my drink I taken their weapons away from 'em and throwed 'em headfirst out the side door. How was I to know somebody had just put up a new cast iron hitching rack out there? Their friends carried 'em over to the Red Tomahawk to sew up their scalps, and I went back into the Silver Saddle to see if Soapy had come to yet. Just as I reached the door he come weaving out, muttering in his whiskers and waving his 6-shooter. "Do you remember what all I told you?" I demanded. "Some of it." He goggled, with his glassy eyes wobbling in all directions. "Well, get going then," I urged, and helped him up onto his horse. He left town at full speed, with both feet out of the stirrups and both arms around the horse neck. "Drink is a curse and a delusion," I told the barkeep in disgust. "Look at that sickening example and take warning. Gimme me a bottle of rye." Well, Gooseneck done a good job of advertising the show. By the middle of the next afternoon men was pouring into town from claims all up and down the creek. Half an hour before the match was set to begin the hall was full. The benches was moved back from the front part, leaving a space clear all the way across the hall. There had been a lot of argument about who was to compete, and who was to choose sides, but when it was finally settled, as satisfactory as anything ever was settled in Yellow Dog, there was 20 men to compete, and Lobo Harrison and Jack Clanton was to choose up. By a peculiar coincidence, half of that 20 men was Gooseneck's, and half was Bull's. So naturally Lobo chose his pals, and Clanton chose his'n. "I don't like this," Gooseneck whispered to me. "I'd rather they'd been mixed up. This is beginning to look like a contest between my gang and Bull's. If they win, it'll make me look cheap." "Where the hell is Snake River?" "I ain't seen him," I said. "You ought to have made 'em take off their guns." "Shucks," says he. "What could possibly stir up trouble at such a ladylike affair as a spellin' bee? Dang it, where is Snake River? Old Jake said he'd get him here on time." Hey, gooseneck! Yelled Bull Hawkins from where he sat amongst his cohorts. Won't you start the show? Bull was a big broad-shouldered hombre with black mustaches like a walrus. The crowd began to holler and cuss and stomp their feet, and this pleased Bull very much. Keep him amused, hissed Gooseneck. I'll go look for Snake River. He snuck out a side door and I riz up and addressed the throng. Gents, I said, be patient. There is a slight delay, but it won't be long. Meantime I'll be glad to entertain you all to the best of my ability. Would you like to hear me sing Barbary Allen? No, by grab. They answered in one bellow. Well, you're going to. I roared, infuriated by this callous lack of the finer feelings. I will now sing, I says, drawing my 45s and I blows the brains out of the first coyote which tries to interrupt me. I then sung my song without interference, and when I was through I bowed and waited for the applause. But all I heard was Lobo Harrison saying, imagine what the poor wolves on Bear Creek has to put up with. This cut me to the quick, but before I could make a suitable reply, Gooseneck slid in, breathing heavy. I can't find Snake River, he hissed. But the barkeep gimme a book he found somewheres. Most of the leaves is tore out, but there's plenty left. I've marked some of the longest words, Breck. You can read good enough to give 'em out. You got to. If we don't start the show right away, this mob'll wreck the place. You're the only man not in the match which can even read a little, outside of me and Bull. It wouldn't look right for me to do it, and I sure ain't going to let Bull run my show. I knew I was licked, or, well, all right, I said. I might have knew I'd be the goat. Gimme the book, here it is, he said. The Adventures of a French Countess. Be darn sure you don't give out no words except them I marked. Hey, Bull Jack Clanton. We're getting tired standing up here. Open the ball. All right, I says. We commences. Hey, said Bull. Nobody told us Elkins was going to conduct the ceremony. We was told a cultured gent from outer town was to do it. Well, I says irritably, Bear Creek is my home range, and I reckon I'm as cultured as any snake hunter here. If anybody thinks he's better qualified than me, step up whilst I stomp his ears off. Nobody volunteered, so I says all right. I trusses $1 to see who gets the first word. It fell for Harrison's gang, so I looked in the book at the first word marked, and it was a gal's name, Catherine, I says. Nobody said nothing. Catherine, I roared, glaring at Lobo Harrison. What you looking at me for? He demanded. I don't know no gal by that name. $, and at. I says with passion. That's the word I give out. Spell it, damn it. Oh, says he. All right. Katharinn. That's wrong, I says. What you mean wrong? He roared. That's right. Tain't according to the book, I said. Dang the book, says he. I knows my rights and I ain't to be uked by no ignorant grizzly from Bear Creek. Who you can ignorant? I demanded, stung. Set down. You spelt it wrong, you lie. He howled, and went for his gun. But I fired first. When the smoke cleared away I seen everybody was on their feet preparing for to stampede, such as warn't trying to crawl under the benches, so I said, set down, everybody. They ain't nothing to get excited about. The spellin' match continues and I'll shoot the first scoundrel which tries to leave the hall before the entertainment's over. Gooseneck hissed fiercely at me, damn it, be careful who you shoot, can't ya? That was another one of my voters, drag him out. I commanded, wiping off some blood where a slug had notched my ear. The spellin' match is ready to commence again. There was a kind of tension in the air, men shuffling their feet and twisting their mustaches and hitching their gun belts, but I give no heed. I now approached the other side, with my hand on my pistol, and says to Clanton, can you spell Catherine? Catharine. Says he, right, by golly. I says, consulting the French Countess, and the audience cheered wildly and shot off their pistols into the roof. Hey, says Bill Stark, on the other side. That's wrong. Make him set down. It spells with a K. He spelt it just like it is in the book, I says. Look for yourself, I don't give a damn. He yelled, rudely knocking the French Countess out of my hand. It's a misprint. It spells with a K or there'll be more blood on the floor. He spelt it wrong and if he don't set down I shoots him down. I'm running this show. I bellowed, beginning to get mad. You got to shoot me before you shoots anybody else. With pleasure. Snarled he, and went for his gun. Well, I hit him on the jaw with my fist and he went to sleep amongst a wreckage of busted benches. Gooseneck jumped up with a maddened shriek. Dang your soul, Breckenridge. He squalled. Quit cancelling my votes. Who are you working for, me or Hawkins? Haw. 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 Bellowed Hawkins. Go on with the show. This is the funniest thing I ever seen. Wham. The door crashed open and in pranced old Jake Hansen, waving a shotgun. Welcome to the festivities, Jake, I greeted him. Where's, you son of a skunk? Quoth he, and let go at me with both barrels. The shots scattered remarkable. I didn't get more'n 5 or 6 of them and the rest distributed freely amongst the crowd. You ought to have heard 'em holler, the folks, I mean, not the buckshot. What in tarnation air you doing? Shrieked Gooseneck. Where's Snake River? Gone. Howled old Jake. Run off. Eloped with my daughter. Bull Hawkins riz with a howl of anguish, convulsively clutching his whiskers. Salome? He bellowed. Eloped, with a cussed gambler they brung over from Alderville. Bleated old Jake, doing a war dance in his passion. Elkins and Wilkerson persuaded me to take that snake into my bosom. In spite of my pleas and protests they forced him into my peaceful $% household, and he stole the poor, mutton-headed innocent's blasted heart with his cultured airs and his slick talk. They've run off to get married, it's a political plot. Shrieked Hawkins, going for his gun. Wilkerson done it a purpose. I shot the gun out of his hand, but Jack Clanton crashed a bench down on Gooseneck's head and Gooseneck kissed the floor. Clanton come down on top of him, out cold, as Mule McGraw swung with a pistol butt, and the next instant somebody lammed Mule with a brick bat and he flopped down across Clanton. And then the fight was on. Them rival political factions just kind of riz up and rolled together in a wave of profanity, gun smoke and splintering benches. I have always noticed that the best thing to do in such cases is to keep your temper, and that's what I did for some time, in spite of the efforts of 9 or 10 wild-eyed Hawkinets. I didn't even shoot one of them. I kept my head and battered their skulls with a joist I tore out of the floor, and when I knocked 'em down I didn't stomp 'em hardly any. But they kept coming, and Jack MacDonald was obsessed with the notion that he could drive me to the floor by jumping up a straddle of my neck. So he done it, and having discovered his idea was a hallucination, he got a fistful of my hair with his left, and started beating me in the head with his pistol barrel. It was very annoying. Simultaneous, several other misfits got hold of my legs, trying to wrestle me down, and some son of Balial stomped severely on my toe. I had bore my afflictions as patient as Job up to that time, but this perfidy maddened me. I give a roar which loosened the shingles on the roof, and kicked the toe stomper in the belly with such fury that he curled up on the floor with a hollow groan and taken no more interest in the proceedings. I likewise busted my timber on somebody's skull, and reached up and pulled Jack MacDonald off my neck like pulling a tick off a bull's hide, and have him through a convenient winder. He's a liar when he says I aimed him deliberate at that rain barrel. I didn't even know there was a rain barrel till I heard his head crash through the staves. I then shaken 9 or 10 idiots loose from my shoulders and shook the blood out of my eyes and perceived that Gooseneck's men was getting the worst of it, particularly including Gooseneck himself. So I give another roar and prepared to wade through them fool Hawkinets like a bar through a pack of hound dogs, when I discovered that some perfidious sidewinder had got my spurt tangled in his whiskers. I stooped to untangle myself, just as a charge of buckshot ripped through the air where my head had been an instant before. 3 or 4 critters was rushing me with bowie knives, so I give a wrench and tore loose by main force. How could I help it if most of the whiskers come loose too? I grabbed me a bench to use for a club, and I mowed the whole first rank down with one swipe, and then as I drawed back for another lick, I heard somebody yelling above the melee, "Gold!" He shrieked. Everybody stopped like they was froze in their tracks. Even Bull Hawkins shook the blood out of his eyes and glared up from where he was kneeling on Gooseneck's wishbone with one hand in Gooseneck's hair and a bowie in the other. Everybody quit fighting everybody else, and looked at the door, and there was Soapy Jackson, a-reeling and a-weaving with an empty bottle in one hand, and hollering. "Big gold strike in Wild Hoss Gulch," he blats. "Biggest the West ever seen. Nuggets the size of ostrich eggs gulp." He disappeared in a wave of frenzied humanity as Yellow Dog's population abandoned the fray and headed for the wide open spaces. Even Hawkins ceased his efforts to sculpt Gooseneck alive and joined the stampede. They tore the whole front out of the city hall in their flight, and even them which had been knocked stiff come to at the howl of gold, and staggered wildly after the mob, shrieking pitifully for their picks, shovels and jackasses. When the dust had settled and the thunder of boot heels had faded in the distance, the only human left in the city hall was me and Gooseneck, and Soapy Jackson, which riz unsteadily with the prints of hobnails all over his homely face. They sure trampled him free and generous in their rush. Gooseneck staggered up, glared wildly about him, and went into convulsions. At first he couldn't talk at all, he just frothed at the mouth. When he found speech his language was shocking. "What you spring at this time of night for?" he howled. "Breckenridge," I said. "Tell him to bring the news in the morning, not tonight." "I did tell him that," I says. "Oh, so that was what I couldn't remember," says Soapy. "That lick MacDonald gimme so plumb addled my brains I knowed there was something I forgot, but couldn't remember what it was. Oh soul my oh," gibbered Gooseneck, or words to that effect. "Well, what you kickin' about?" I demanded peevishly, having just discovered that somebody had stabbed me in the hind leg during the melee. My boot was full of blood, and they was brand new boots. "It worked, didn't it?" I says. "They're all headin' for Wild Hoss Gulch, including Hawkins herself, and they can't possibly get back before day after tomorrow." "Yeah," raved Gooseneck. "They're all gone, including my gang. The damn camp's empty. How can I get elected with nobody here to hold the election, and nobody to vote?" "Oh," I says. "That's right. I hadn't thunk of that." He fixed me with a awful eye. "Did you," says he in a blood-curdling voice, "did you tell my voters Soapy was going to enact a political strategy?" "By golly," I said. "You know it plumb slipped my mind. Ain't that a joke on me?" "Get out of my life," says Gooseneck, drawing his gun. That was a genteel way for him to act, trying to shoot me after all I did for him. I'd taken his gun away from him as gentle as I knowed how, and it was his own fault he got his arm broke. But to hear him rave, you would have thought he considered I was to blame for his misfortunes or something. I was so darn disgusted I clumb onto Camp Kid and shaken the dust of that there camp off of my boots, because I seen there was no gratitude in Yellow Dog. I likewise seen I wasn't cut out for the skullduggery of politics. I had me a notion one time that I'd make a sheriff, but I learned my lesson. It's like my pap says, I reckon, all the law a man needs, says he, is a gun tucked into his pants. And the main lunnin he needs is to know which end of that gun the bullet comes out of. What's good enough for pap, gents, is good enough for me.